In 1879, a scraggly donkey named Barnabas couldn't fetch $5 at any auction in Deadwood, rejected by every bidder who saw him as worthless. But when this unwanted animal began acting strangely near an abandoned ridge, leading his desperate owner toward what would become the richest silver strike in Dakota Territory history, everyone realized they had gravely underestimated him. What did Barnabas sense in that mountainside that made seasoned prospectors and greedy investors completely overlook a fortune worth millions? The wooden hammer slammed down on the auction block with a sound like thunder, and another horse sold for more money than most folks in Deadwood saw in a year. It was 1879, and the Dakota Territory buzzed with dreams of gold and silver hidden in every hill. Jeremiah Caldwell wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched rich men bid on prize animals like they were buying candy at the general store. Standing next to him, a small gray donkey named Barnabas flicked his ears at the noise. This little fellow had been to more auctions than a traveling salesman, but nobody ever wanted him. His legs looked too short, his coat seemed too dull, and his size made grown men shake their heads and walk away. Next up, we got a fine work donkey, called out auctioneer Pete Morrison, though his voice didn't sound very excited. He's strong and healthy, perfect for carrying supplies up mountain trails. The crowd of ranchers and miners barely looked up from their conversations. A few boys pointed and giggled at Barnabas, who stood perfectly still like a statue. His dark eyes watched everything happening around him, but he never made a sound. "Do I hear $20? Pete asked, his voice getting louder. The silence stretched on like a lazy afternoon. Somewhere in the back, a man coughed. A baby started crying, but nobody raised their hand to bid. Jeremiah felt his cheeks turn red as people stared at them. His wife Martha had loved this donkey before she passed away last winter. She always said Barnabas was special, though Jeremiah couldn't see how. The bills for their small farm kept piling up, and selling Barnabas seemed like the only way to get some quick money. $15? Pete tried again, sounding hopeful. A woman near the front shook her head and turned away. Two cowboys laughed and pointed at Barnabas's small size compared to the powerful horses they'd been watching all morning. Just then, something strange happened. Barnabas lifted his head high and looked directly at the crowd. His ears pointed forward like he was listening to music nobody else could hear. For a moment, the talking stopped, and everyone stared back at the little donkey, who suddenly seemed much more interesting. $10? Pete's voice cracked slightly. Still nothing. The uncomfortable quiet made Jeremiah want to disappear into the ground. He started to wonder if maybe nobody would ever want Barnabas, and what that would mean for both of them. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a rough voice called out, $5! But when Pete looked around to find the bidder, the man seemed to have vanished like smoke in the wind. The mystery bidder never came forward to pay, which meant Jeremiah walked home that evening with Barnabas still following behind him. The dusty road back to their small cabin stretched ahead like a ribbon, and both man and donkey moved slowly under the weight of disappointment. "Well, boy," Jeremiah said, looking down at his four-legged companion. "Looks like we're stuck together for another week." He tried to sound cheerful, but inside, his stomach churned with worry. The bankman would come calling soon, asking for money Jeremiah didn't have. Barnabas seemed unbothered by their situation. Instead of hanging his head sadly like most rejected animals might do, he walked with purpose. His small hooves made steady clicking sounds on the hard-packed earth, and his tail swished back and forth like he knew a secret. As they reached their property, something unusual caught Jeremiah's attention. Barnabas suddenly stopped walking and turned his head toward the eastern hills. His nostrils opened wide, sniffing the air like a hunting dog. Then he took 3 careful steps in that direction, pulling against his lead rope. "What's gotten into you?" Jeremiah asked, squinting toward the rocky hills where nothing but scrub brush and old mining claims dotted the landscape. The sun was setting, painting everything orange and purple, but he couldn't see anything worth getting excited about. Barnabas planted his feet firmly and continued pulling toward the hills. This wasn't the behavior of a dumb farm animal. The donkey seemed to sense something important, though Jeremiah couldn't imagine what it might be. That night, as Jeremiah sat on his porch eating beans from a can, he watched Barnabas in the small corral. The donkey kept looking toward those eastern hills, his ears constantly moving like he was listening to distant sounds. Every few minutes, he would pace to the side of the fence closest to the hills and stand there quietly. "Martha always said you were different," Jeremiah whispered to the night air. His late wife had spent hours talking to Barnabas, claiming the donkey understood every word. Back then, Jeremiah had smiled and nodded, thinking it was just the fancy of a lonely woman. Now he wasn't so sure. Around midnight, Jeremiah was awakened by soft sounds from outside. Peering through his window, he saw Barnabas digging small holes in the dirt near his fence. The patterns looked almost like arrows, all pointing in the same direction toward those mysterious eastern hills. The next morning brought gray clouds and the smell of coming rain. As Jeremiah fed Barnabas his breakfast oats, he made a decision that would change everything. If the donkey wanted to explore those hills so badly, maybe it was time to trust an animal's instincts over human judgment about what made sense. Barnabas stood perfectly still in the moonlight, staring at nothing anyone else could see. His ears pointed toward the dark hills like compass needles, twitching at sounds only he could hear. Jeremiah rubbed his tired eyes and wondered if hunger was making him imagine things about his donkey. "What's eating at you, boy?" Jeremiah whispered, approaching slowly. The autumn night felt different somehow, charged with electricity like the air before a thunderstorm. Barnabas had refused his evening oats and instead kept pulling toward the eastern ridge where jagged rocks cut black shapes against the starry sky. 3 days had passed since the failed auction. 3 days of wondering how he would pay the bank loan due next week. 3 days of watching Barnabas act stranger and stranger, as if the donkey knew secrets hidden in the Dakota Territory hills. Martha's old rocking chair creaked on the porch behind them, moved by wind that seemed to carry whispers from the past. She used to say animals could sense things people missed completely. "Trust what Barnabas shows you," she had told Jeremiah the week before the fever took her. "That donkey's got more wisdom than most folks twice his age." Now Barnabas pulled against his rope again, not wild or panicked, but steady and determined. His small hooves scratched marks in the dirt that looked almost like arrows pointing east. When Jeremiah knelt to examine them closer, something glinted between the rocks nearby. A piece of white quartz, smooth as river glass, reflected the moonlight like a tiny star fallen to earth. But this wasn't ordinary quartz. Dark veins ran through it like frozen lightning, and it felt heavy in Jeremiah's weathered palm. Too heavy for simple stone. "Where'd this come from?" he asked. But Barnabas was already moving toward another spot, his nose close to the ground, like a hunting dog following a scent trail. More quartz pieces lay scattered near the fence post, each one marked with those same dark veins that seemed to pulse in the pale light. Martha's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the biggest treasures hide in the smallest packages." She had been talking about Barnabas when she said it, defending the donkey against neighbors who called him worthless. Now Jeremiah wondered if she had meant something deeper. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of pine and something metallic from the eastern ridge. Barnabas lifted his head and brayed softly, a sound full of longing that made Jeremiah's chest tighten. Whatever the donkey sensed up there, it called to him like water calls to a man dying of thirst. "All right, old friend," Jeremiah said, stroking the donkey's neck. "Tomorrow we'll see what's got you so worked up. But if this is another wild goose chase, we're both going to starve before winter sets in." Barnabas turned his dark eyes toward his owner, and in them Jeremiah saw something that made his breath catch. Not confusion or fear, but certainty. Pure, unshakable certainty that tomorrow would change everything. The question was whether that change would save them or destroy them completely. Dawn came slow and gray, painting the black hills in shades of ash and silver. Jeremiah loaded his prospecting tools into leather packs while Barnabas stood ready, as if he had been waiting all night for this moment. The donkey's ears stayed pricked forward, focused on the mysterious ridge that seemed to call his name. "Easy there, boy," Jeremiah muttered, checking the straps on the makeshift saddlebags. "Whatever's up there has waited this long. It can wait another minute." But Barnabas disagreed. The moment Jeremiah finished packing, the donkey started walking toward the trail without being led. His small legs moved with purpose, picking a path through the rocks that seemed impossible for such a short animal to navigate. The climb grew steep fast. Loose stones rolled under their feet, clattering down the hillside like marbles spilled from a child's game. Twice, Jeremiah's boots slipped on patches of shale, and twice Barnabas planted himself like an anchor, keeping them both from tumbling into the canyon below. "How do you know where you're going?" Jeremiah panted, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. The donkey moved with the confidence of someone following a well-worn trail, even though no path existed on the treacherous slope. Higher up, the air grew thin and sharp. Pine trees gave way to bare rock and scattered brush. Jeremiah's lungs burned with each breath, but Barnabas showed no signs of tiring. If anything, the donkey seemed to grow more excited with each step, his pace quickening as they neared the ridgetop. Then Barnabas stopped so suddenly that Jeremiah nearly walked into him. "What now?" Jeremiah looked around, seeing nothing but wind-carved stone and empty sky. But Barnabas was staring at what appeared to be solid rock face, his nostrils flaring as if he smelled something wonderful. Jeremiah moved closer and gasped. Hidden behind a curtain of dried vines and fallen timber was a cave opening, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Cool air flowed from the darkness, carrying scents that made his heart race. Minerals, metal, and something else that every prospector dreams of finding. "Well, I'll be," he whispered, pulling away the dead branches that concealed the entrance. "How did you know this was here?" Inside, his lantern revealed smooth walls marked with tool scratches. Someone had worked this cave before, carving handholds and support beams that still stood strong after years of abandonment. But whoever had been here had left in a hurry, dropping tools and supplies that lay scattered on the rocky floor. The tunnel sloped gently downward, following a natural crack in the mountain. Jeremiah's light caught glints of something precious in the walls, thin veins that sparkled like captured starlight. His hand shook as he scraped at the stone with his knife, revealing streaks of pure silver that ran deeper than he could reach. "Sweet mother of pearl," he breathed. "Barnabas, you beautiful, brilliant beast. You found it. You actually found it." But even as excitement flooded through him, a chill ran down his spine. Fresh scratches marked the cave walls near the entrance, deep gouges that could only come from claws longer than a man's fingers. Something large and dangerous had been using this cave recently, and might come back at any time. The question was whether they could extract enough silver to save the farm before whatever lived here returned to reclaim its territory. 3 armed strangers rode up the mountain trail, just as Jeremiah pulled another chunk of silver from the cave wall. Their horses kicked up dust clouds that made Barnabas lift his head from the grass patch where he'd been peacefully eating. The lead rider wore a black hat pulled low over mean eyes, and his 2 friends carried rifles across their saddles like they knew how to use them. Well, what do we have here?" The man in the black hat jumped down from his horse and walked straight toward Jeremiah's mining tools. "Looks like someone's been digging without permission." Jeremiah set down his pickaxe and wiped sweat from his face. His heart started beating faster because he knew trouble when he saw it. These weren't friendly visitors coming to say hello. "This is my claim, filed legal and proper at the territorial office in Deadwood." "Funny thing about paperwork," the second rider said, still sitting on his horse with his rifle ready. "Sometimes it gets lost. Sometimes it never existed at all." The man in the black hat kicked at the pile of silver ore Jeremiah had spent 3 days digging out. Beautiful chunks of metal scattered across the rocky ground like broken dreams. "Name's Rusty Brennan, and this here mountain belongs to my boss, Mr. Morrison. You're trespassing." Barnabas walked slowly between the 3 strangers and Jeremiah. The little donkey's ears went flat against his head, not from fear but from anger. His dark eyes watched every move the men made, like he was memorizing their faces for later. "Your donkey's got an attitude problem." The third man laughed, but his laugh sounded nervous. "Maybe we should teach him some manners." "Touch that animal, and you'll answer to me," Jeremiah said, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. He'd faced down claim jumpers before, but never 3 at once, and never when he had something this valuable to protect. Brennan pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and waved it in the air. "Got the real deed right here, signed and witnessed just last week. You got 1 hour to pack your gear and get off Morrison land, old man." The paper looked official enough, but Jeremiah had learned to read people better than documents during his years on the frontier. Something about Brennan's shifting eyes and sweaty palms told him this whole story was built on lies. "I'm not moving," Jeremiah said quietly. "This silver belongs to me and Barnabas." Brennan's hand dropped to the gun on his hip. "That's so? Well, maybe you need some convincing." But before anyone could draw a weapon, a deep growling sound echoed from inside the cave. All 5 sets of eyes turned toward the dark opening where something large was moving in the shadows. Barnabas's ears shot forward, and he took 2 quick steps toward the cave entrance like he was welcoming an old friend. The growling got louder, and closer, and angrier. A massive grizzly bear stepped out of the cave, shaking dirt from its thick brown fur. The animal stood taller than any of the horses, with claws as long as railroad spikes and teeth that caught the morning sunlight like ivory daggers. This wasn't some young bear looking for easy food. This was an old warrior, with scars across its face and muscles that rippled under its coat. "Sweet mother of pearl," Brennan whispered, his gun forgotten as pure terror took over his brain. The bear's small black eyes studied each person carefully, like a judge deciding who deserved punishment. It sniffed the air twice, testing scents that humans couldn't even detect. Then, something amazing happened. The great beast looked directly at Barnabas and made a soft huffing sound that almost seemed friendly. Barnabas didn't run or panic. Instead, the little donkey walked closer to the bear and stood perfectly still, showing no fear at all. The 2 animals looked at each other like old neighbors meeting at a fence line, sharing some secret understanding that left the humans speechless with wonder. "That bear has been living in our mine," Jeremiah realized, his voice barely above a whisper. "Barnabas knew it was there the whole time." The first horse bolted, carrying its rider backward down the mountain trail at dangerous speed. The man's terrified screams echoed off the canyon walls until distance swallowed them completely. The second horse reared up on its back legs, dumping its rider onto the rocky ground before racing after its companion. Brennan tried to control his mount, but the animal wanted nothing to do with 800 pounds of angry grizzly bear. "This ain't over, Caldwell," he shouted, as his horse spun in circles, fighting the bit and dancing sideways toward the trail. The bear took 1 step forward, then another. Its massive paws left prints in the soft earth that looked like dinner plates pressed into clay. Every step brought it closer to the 3 remaining humans, and every step made Brennan's horse more desperate to escape. "Easy, boy," Jeremiah whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the bear, the horse, or himself. Barnabas moved between the bear and Brennan, not to protect the claim jumper, but to guide the situation. The donkey turned his head toward the trail and brayed once, a sound that somehow convinced both the bear and the horse to move in that direction. Within seconds, Brennan was racing down the mountain, clinging to his saddle like his life depended on it. His threats and legal papers meant nothing now. The grizzly watched him go, then turned back toward the cave entrance, pausing only to look at Barnabas one more time. "Well, I'll be," Jeremiah breathed, understanding finally dawning in his mind. "You 2 made a deal, didn't you?" The bear disappeared back into its cave home, and Barnabas returned to his grass patch, acting like nothing unusual had happened at all. The heavy wooden door of the assayer's office slammed shut behind 3 men in expensive suits, their faces twisted with anger. Word had spread faster than wildfire through Deadwood that morning. Jeremiah's silver samples contained enough precious metal to buy entire railroads. Now, every greedy businessman within 500 miles wanted a piece of the action, and they weren't taking no for an answer. "That old fool doesn't understand what he's dealing with," growled Harrison Mills, the fattest of the 3 visitors. His gold pocket watch gleamed as he pulled it out to check the time. Nobody stumbles onto that much silver by accident. Outside the building, townspeople gathered in small groups, whispering excitedly about the discovery. Children pressed their noses against shop windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous donkey everyone was talking about. Even the local newspaper had sent a reporter all the way from Rapid City to write about the story. Back at the mine, Jeremiah sat on a wooden crate, watching Barnabas eat fresh oats from a new metal bucket. The donkey's coat had grown shiny and thick over the past 3 weeks, no longer the dull gray color that had made him look so ordinary at the auctions. His eyes seemed brighter too, as if he understood that everything had changed. "Seems like the whole world wants to meet you now, old friend," Jeremiah said softly, scratching behind the donkey's ears. "Funny how nobody cared about you when we were sleeping in that cold barn last month." A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger by the minute. Soon, Jeremiah could make out a fancy black carriage pulled by 2 white horses, moving much too fast for the Rocky Mountain path. The driver wore a top hat that bobbed up and down as the carriage bounced over stones and holes. When the carriage finally stopped, Out stepped a woman in a bright blue dress with more ruffles than a wedding cake. Her shoes were so shiny they hurt to look at, and she carried a small white dog that yapped constantly at everything it saw. "Mr. Caldwell," she called out in a voice that sounded like she was used to getting whatever she wanted. "I am Mrs. Victoria Pembroke from Denver. I have traveled 2 days to make you an offer you simply cannot refuse." Barnabas lifted his head from the oat bucket and studied the woman carefully. His ears flicked forward, then back, as if he was trying to figure out whether she meant trouble or not. Mrs. Pembroke opened a leather bag and pulled out more money than Jeremiah had ever seen in one place. The bills were crisp and new, stacked so high they almost fell over in the mountain breeze. $5,000, she announced proudly. Cash money. Right here, right now. All you have to do is sell me that donkey. Jeremiah's mouth fell open. $5,000 was more than most people made in 10 years of hard work. It was enough to buy a mansion in Denver, or a whole ranch with hundreds of cattle. His hands trembled slightly as he thought about what that much money could do for him. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "that's a mighty generous offer, but I need to think about it." "Think about it?" Mrs. Pembroke's voice rose to a screech that made her little dog bark even louder. "Mr. Caldwell, this is more money than you will ever see again in your entire life. What possible reason could you have for hesitation?" The morning sun painted the black hills in shades of gold and purple as Jeremiah made his decision. He had spent all night pacing around his small cabin, thinking about Mrs. Pembroke's offer and all the other people who had come calling with their bags of money and fancy promises. Sleep had been impossible, with so many thoughts spinning around in his head like leaves in a tornado. Barnabas stood quietly beside the stream, drinking the clear mountain water and watching his reflection ripple with each sip. He seemed perfectly content, as if he had no idea that half the territory wanted to buy him, or that his owner was wrestling with the biggest choice of his life. "You know what, Barnabas?" Jeremiah called out, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. "I figured something out during the long night." The donkey lifted his head and walked over, his small hooves making soft clicking sounds on the rocky ground. When he reached Jeremiah's side, he gently bumped the old man's shoulder with his nose, the same way he had done every morning since they first met. Mrs. Pembroke's carriage appeared again on the mountain path, right on time, just as she had promised. This time, she brought even more people with her, men in business suits, a photographer with a huge camera, and someone who claimed to be a writer for a famous magazine back east. "Mr. Caldwell," she called out before the carriage had even stopped moving, "I hope you have good news for us today." Jeremiah walked forward slowly, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The group of visitors formed a half circle around him, their faces eager and excited like children waiting for Christmas presents. "Ma'am, I appreciate your generous offer," he began, his voice steady and calm. $5,000 is more money than I ever dreamed of having, but I'm afraid my answer is no." The silence that followed was so complete that even the birds seemed to stop singing. Mrs. Pembroke's face turned 3 different shades of red before she found her voice again. "No," she sputtered. But that's impossible. Nobody turns down $5,000. Are you completely out of your mind?" "Maybe I am," Jeremiah replied with a gentle smile. "But you see, some things in this world can't be bought with any amount of money. Barnabas here isn't just a donkey, he's my partner, my friend, and the reason I'm not sleeping in a cold barn anymore." He walked over to Barnabas and put his arm around the donkey's neck. This little fellow saw something in that mountain that nobody else could see. He led me to riches beyond my wildest dreams, not because he was trying to get rich, but because that's just who he is. The photographer raised his camera, and the flash powder exploded with a bright white light. Years later, that picture would appear in newspapers across the country, showing a simple old man and his donkey standing together against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. "Besides," Jeremiah continued, "what good is all the money in the world if you have to give up everything that really matters to get it? Barnabas trusted me when nobody else would, and now it's my turn to show the same loyalty." Mrs. Pembroke climbed back into her carriage without another word, her little dog still yapping at everything in sight. As the dust cloud disappeared down the mountain, Jeremiah and Barnabas returned to their simple life, richer than any amount of money could ever make them. The silver mine continued to produce wealth for many years, But the real treasure was something much more valuable. The friendship between a man who learned to see beyond appearances and a donkey who proved that worth comes from the heart, not from what others are willing to pay.